This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to What the Health, an independent approach to your health span. Have you noticed how our healthcare system may not have your best interest in mind? Join Dr. Eckel in this fun and sometimes disturbing exploration of the state of healthcare and what it means for you. Now, here's your host, Dr. Eckel.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I am Dr. Greg Eckel, and this is What the Health. Thank you for joining us today. We have an awesome topic, very timely. Dr. Evan Hirsch is on board. He has been on the show before, but this time we're talking about a four-step process, and in particular around resolving long haulers naturally. Dr. Hirsch, he is world-renowned fatigue and long haulers expert, founder and CEO of the International Center of Fatigue. Through his best-selling book, his podcast, and international online programs, he's helped thousands of people around the world resolve their chronic fatigue syndrome and long hauler symptoms naturally. And I really like that on the naturally part. He's on a mission to help 1 million people more. He's been featured on television, podcasts, summits, and when he's not at the office, you can hear him singing musicals, which I love, dancing and playing basketball with his family. So today, long haulers naturally. Welcome aboard, Dr. Hirsch.
Dr. Greg, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, you are so welcome. It's always a great conversation, and you are out helping thousands of folks worldwide, and that's a super exciting mission that you're on. And I love supporting folks with big missions on helping more people, because that helps me with my purpose, which is helping millions as well. So with their health. So in particular, we're hearing a lot about long haulers syndrome and or this component. How does somebody know if they've got the long hauler syndrome, and what is it?
Yeah, so that is the question. What is it? And so basically, for people who have had the pandemic virus, we're not going to use the name because of censorship issues, but if you've had the virus and then you have symptoms that persist, then you have what's called long haulers or long, in the name of the virus. So, and that can be really, your symptoms can kind of come and go, where maybe you just had a couple of symptoms initially. Maybe you had like upper respiratory symptoms, headache, body pain, runny nose, loss of sense of smell or taste, and then those symptoms went away. And then they came back. And then oftentimes the symptoms are rotating, where people will say that the symptoms that they have now are worse than the new symptoms are worse, the old symptoms are better. So you have this sort of rotation, unfortunately, where things kind of come and go. And unfortunately, we're seeing now that there's like 250 different symptoms that can be present when people have long haulers. And that's because the virus can go any place that the blood goes in the body, which is basically everywhere, which can then cause inflammation in any part of the body, which consequently then causes these symptoms. And so then to answer your first question, which is how do people know whether or not they have long haulers, you basically have to have had some sort of flu-like or viral illness since November 2019 with symptoms that have persisted for longer than a month. And that number sometimes is getting debated about. There is no hard and fast rule right now, but by a month after you have a virus, those symptoms should have resolved. So it's somewhere between like a month and 2 months of persistent symptoms.
What is this new? We've got a new name, long hauler syndrome, which is nebulous, right? I don't want to get that. I don't want, I hear from a lot of folks like, oh, I don't want to get that. Like that just doesn't sound fun. But this isn't new.
It's not. It's not new. So post-viral syndrome can really happen after any sort of virus that somebody gets. And so there's a lot of comparisons right now that are happening with post-viral syndrome, or even myalgic encephalitis and chronic fatigue syndrome, which is something that we've been working on for years, where it's just a different bug. And the reality is that the reason why, and I know we're going to get into this, the reason why people end up getting it is because of the total overall body burden, the crap that they have in their bodies and the deficiencies that they have in their bodies that end up setting the stage. And then all of a sudden comes this virus, which could be any virus, really could be Epstein-Barr virus, could be cytomegalovirus, HHV6, where that is then the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Got it. Yeah, that is such a big point for folks to understand, that there's nothing new here, folks. Like, this is just another bug. It's another virus. And this is what viruses do. There is a subset of the population that has a propensity for it to linger or to have these. And, that component, are you seeing in the literature or clinically, like, is there a preponderance of certain symptoms? I mean, you said 250 symptoms, that's huge, but there perhaps, we've seen like brain fog is one of those things.
Exactly.
Any other constellation that you've seen?
Yeah, so number one is fatigue. In one study, 87% of people experienced fatigue, and then it goes brain fog and headaches and body pain, and then neuropathies. So that's nerve pain, numbness, tingling, electrical, anything that's affecting the nerves.
Got it. Well, and those are significant. So I'm not saying that this is not a real thing, and or it can be rather debilitating, especially with fatigue and 86% of those that are suffering. Now, do you have a stat on how many people that have the virus then go on to develop this long haulers component?
Absolutely. And initially, when we first started seeing the research coming out, it was a bit alarming, because we were seeing stats like 57% of everybody who gets the virus ends up progressing, or 54%. But now what we're seeing, after millions of people being evaluated, is it's somewhere between 10 and 30%.
Ooh. So pretty high numbers.
Which is definitely a yes. And those are for people who have been outpatient cases. So that means you have not gone into the hospital. For people who've gone into the hospital, the numbers are 75 to 85% of those people will progress on to having long haulers. Now, when you're looking at the numbers, even if you're going on the low end of 10%, the estimates are that by the time this pandemic is over, we're going to have seen 1 billion people have the virus. Which means that 100 million people are going to end up with long haulers. And that's the size of like California, Florida, half of New York. I mean, it's a tremendous
population in the United States, right?
Exactly. Yes. And we're talking worldwide, but it just tells you how many people, because yes, it is like a third of the population of the United States. So it's definitely something that people need to pay attention to, that people need to, as soon as they notice that they're starting to have symptoms, whether they know that it's this virus or whether it's a flu virus, you have to attack it hard and make sure that you push it back so that you don't progress.
The word that comes to mind when I hear that is resiliency. And really what's not getting talked about is the health of the population that then falls into a higher likelihood of developing long-term repercussions of a virus, right? So I want to refresh folks' memory, if maybe somebody's just tuned in, they didn't see you the first time on the show. You've got 3 levels of fatigue, as that's being the biggest kind of symptom of long haulers, and a level 1 problem. So you've got some differentiations in here that I think are important to make as we go into this discussion.
Absolutely. And so this is all about what treatment is actually going to work for the individual. So if somebody can get better just by changing their lifestyle habits, which means more water, better food, more movement, more sleep, then that's a level 1 problem. Okay. If their fatigue goes away with that.
Yeah.
If they're still tired, and then you start to replace their deficiencies, And so this means deficiencies in things like hormones and nutrients and neurotransmitters and mitochondrial function. We can get more into those in a minute. But you replace those and they get better. That means they had a level 2 problem. If they're still tired, then that means that they have a level 3 problem, which means that they have the toxicities. And when we're looking at all of these causes of fatigue and long haulers, we're looking at deficiencies, so things that are not in the body that are supposed to be, like those things I just mentioned. And then toxicities are things that are in the body that aren't supposed to be. So we're talking about things like heavy metals and chemicals and molds and infections like the pandemic virus, or maybe it's Epstein-Barr virus, or maybe it's parasites, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's negative emotional patterns, and there's electromagnetic fields, and there's allergies. So those are kind of the toxicities. And so if you are still tired, then those have to be addressed. And it just so happens that these toxicities actually cause 90% of the deficiencies. So even though this, and as we go into the 4-step process, you'll hear that even though this process is all about removing the toxicities, you actually have to do those last. And there's a reason why.
Got it. And that's interesting, because a lot of people have that whole system flipped around, right? They're addressing those toxicities. And I like the way that you've laid it out for us in that system that you've developed that we're going to talk about today, because it can be done in the wrong order, and then you don't get the outcome that you're looking for. And so many people that I have seen over the last 21 years have been through countless providers, and they're, basically are in like kill mode forever. And it's really, those things tend to be there because of the other imbalances that you mentioned on the phase 1 and phase 2, or first level, second level, using your vernacular there. What are the causes then of the long haulers?
So the most important one is the fact that there's live active virus. So a lot of people think, and a lot of scientists believe, and government bodies believe, that after a month, the virus should be completely gone. The immune system should have done its job and the virus is gone. However, there have been several studies, the most notable of which showed that at 4 months, they did intestinal biopsies of people who had the virus, got over the virus, so they had no symptoms, and half of those people had live active virus in their intestines on intestinal biopsy. Okay, so half of these people who have no symptoms. Okay, so this study unfortunately hasn't been done on long haulers yet, but you can bet that 100% of those people have live active virus. And when you have live active virus, which is avoiding the immune system, it can cause the inflammation. And inflammation is basically just the immune system's reaction to something. The immune system is trying to get rid of this virus, but it's not able to because the virus is hiding, but the immune system knows it's there. And the virus is hiding in different parts of the body. So we do know that there is autoimmunity happening against our organs. And we do know that there's damage to the organs when people get the virus. And this is because the virus is hiding inside the organs, inside the cells. And consequently, in order to get at it, the immune system has to damage the body in order to get at the virus. And that what ends up happening then is that then you get increased inflammation, which leads to pain and dysfunction.
Got it. And I'm guessing a higher likelihood of or potential for autoimmunity as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. And you really can't have fatigue and you can't have long haulers without having autoimmunity, because like I said, the definition of autoimmunity is the immune system attacking itself. And as we just discussed, that's kind of the natural process of having a persistent infection in the body. And so that's the first thing, is that there's a persistent infection. And then the other thing is that there's all these other causes that we see. So we know that 73% of people who have long haulers also have Epstein-Barr virus. Right? We know that a large percentage of these people also have mold, also have heavy metals like lead and mercury, also have chemical toxicity. We know that there's 86,000 different chemicals that we're exposed to on a regular basis that haven't been appropriately evaluated. So all these toxicities end up building up in the body, clogging our detoxification pathways in our liver and triggering the immune system to be off in left field when the infection kind of comes into the body, and so it can't deal with it appropriately. So there's 20 plus different causes that are all happening that have to be addressed, and you don't have to be overwhelmed by that number. You just have to know it's like having 20 nails in the bottom of your foot, and you just have to pull out all 20, otherwise it hurts when you walk.
Very good. The other component of that, what we're seeing, and I'm wondering if you're seeing it. So what was that? 73% of folks with long haulers have Epstein-Barr. We're seeing those old infections resurface. So a lot of folks that had like chronic fatigue syndrome in their 20s, now at 50, they start to get a little bit worried of like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling like I did when I had that chronic fatigue back in 30 years ago. Because those viruses didn't really go away. They're kind of hanging out, waiting opportunistically to kind of resurface. And we're seeing that the COVID, I'll just say it, I want to stop self-censoring myself, right? It's just like, it comes out again because it really does take a toll on the immune system. And so these other viruses that have been kind of waiting in the background say, hey, now's our opportunity to show, let's get to work. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, there's two things that are happening. One is the immune system being distracted so that these other bugs are becoming opportunistic, which just means that they're starting to express themselves, starting to cause problems in the body, and you're getting symptoms related to these infections. The other thing that's happening is that it's operating as a biofilm disruptor. So there's this collagenous jelly-like material that exists on our mucous membranes throughout our bodies, and it hides infections, and infections will get into this biofilm and they'll swap DNA with each other, which will form more superbugs or whatever. But what ends up happening is that the virus will come in and it will break up the biofilm, which will then allow a lot of these infections to be seen and become more opportunistic.
Interesting. I love that you just said collagenous mucilage on the show, and that they're swapping DNA. I love that. That it just rolls off the tongue, and it is that soup though that is so important that we don't really think about it until it starts to surface, and those things are freed up, and then our immune system shows it. Why do you think that the population, I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but I just want to make a point of it. Like it's a virus and it's actually mutating more to more of a simple common cold type constellation, but nobody is talking about why is the population so susceptible to it, right? It kind of got proposed that it's this novel, new, never seen before virus. But that's not entirely true. We've seen varieties of coronavirus has been in the common cold. So what is that? Like, why now? What is going on with the population that it just is such a burden to our health?
Well, as you know, we are sicker than we've ever been, right? Our generation is supposed to be the first one that doesn't outlive their parents, right? Yeah. And so what we saw in the evolution from alpha to delta and so on is that it started off, it was obese men over the age of 65 were getting sick. And then it was like, actually, the people who are getting sick, going to the hospital and dying are actually anybody who's obese. That was like in Delta. It was like you could be 20 years old and obese, and it was an 80% chance that you were going to go in the hospital. So a lot of it has to do with the obesity epidemic, poor dietary habits, being sedentary, not moving enough. I think that's a huge part of it. And then the toxicities that are hijacking the immune system and changing the relationship that we normally have to, these infections. We did have the Spanish flu, back in 1918. There was still toxicities. It was after the Industrial Revolution, not as toxic as today, but that probably played a role as well. But yeah, it's really interesting to look at this relationship between these bugs. I mean, we know that, in this form, we're 90% bug cell and 10% human cell, right? And which, blows my mind to think about it. But that means that we have this wonderful symbiotic relationship with so many different bugs, and that we have to cultivate that relationship. And when that relationship goes awry because of all these things that we've been talking about, that's really where our immune system goes awry as well. I mean, 80% of our immune system is in the gut. And so whatever you put in your mouth is going to affect your immune system. And then we also know that we have this crosstalk with the infections, with the bugs in our body that actually end up making the immune system better and more functional. So there's a lot of dysfunction that's happening right now. The interesting thing about long haulers is that so many people who are getting long haulers actually are not obese, and they're not older. They're people who are athletic, less than the age of 50. Which is really interesting. And a lot of it has to do, and a lot of these people are running lots of miles every day. And a lot of it has to do with what ends up happening with the infection, its effect on the mitochondria, and then taxing the mitochondria on top of that. Now, for those who don't know, the mitochondria produces somewhere between 80 and 90% of our energy. And you're taxing your body when you're going for long runs. Let's say you go for a 3-5 mile run or something like that. Well, depending on who you are, if you go for a mile run, it might be too hard too. But that taxes your body, but then your body has something called hormesis, which then reacts, and you have a healing reaction, which is really supportive. But what ends up happening is that if you've got the virus, where you've got inflammation happening, the body is already stressed, you go ahead and stress it with exercise, that's when we're seeing these people move into becoming long haulers, unfortunately, or they come back too early. They're down and out for a week, and they've been training for a marathon, and they decide that they're going to go back running again, and boom, now they're really down and out with long haulers.
Yeah. Wow. So what is it so hard to treat this?
It has to do with the number of causes and with how slippery the virus is. So if we're going to take that second part, the virus it can be challenging to treat viruses, and you do have to have a somewhat intact immune system to go after any infection. And if the immune system is off in left field because you have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, or other infections, then it's going to be really hard. So that's why, having these 20 different causes or addressing these 20 different causes is so important, because all of them are playing a role in the immune system, in your ability to end up getting rid of the virus. So addressing all those causes is big. And then the other thing is that you've got this virus now, which is live and active, which people aren't talking about. I mean, it's one of the reasons why some of these off-label medication uses are being touted as being supportive in some of the alternative communities. We're not going to say those names also because of censorship. I mean, you can say it if you want to, but I'm just out of habit. I'm just not going to say them. And that's why those can be so helpful as well, is because they're addressing the virus, they're addressing the spike protein in a number of different ways. They're addressing bacteria as well as parasites, which can become opportunistic during this as well. So it's kind of like total body load becomes untenable, and you get symptoms. It's like you've got this barrel that is your body, and it gets so full of stuff, and the virus is the straw that broke the camel's back. It overflows, you get these symptoms. And so all of them, you got to poke a hole in the bottom of the barrel, or you got to get in and start shoveling all that stuff out in order to be successful.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because you've developed some systematic approaches to how to clear the body up. How do we get this vessel back to thrive mode, right? So you got a 4-step fix your fatigue system that you use to treat long haulers, right?
Correct.
So let's dive in on that.
Absolutely. So the first step is all about finding the causes. And so we've talked about a lot of different causes. There's actually 33 potential causes, and everybody has 20 plus causes. So we have to figure out which 20 plus causes an individual has. And we can do that. Fortunately, 75% of those causes can be determined by symptoms alone. And then the other 25% we need labs for.
Yeah.
So that's what we do in the first step. And so when people join our program, we have this workbook, they start going through step one, and usually within an hour, they're going to know 75% of their causes, which is going to really enable them to then match up the correct treatment with that cause. So then in step two, now, as I said early on in this talk, this process is really all about step four. It's all about removing the toxins, getting rid of the virus, the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, all that sort of stuff. But we have to make the body strong first and make it more robust. So that's when we're replacing the deficiencies, boosting the adrenal gland, which is responsible for managing stress in the body, boosting thyroid and mitochondrial function. Like we talked about, it makes 80 to 90% of our energy, boosting neurotransmitter deficiencies, boosting lifestyle habits. So if you're not drinking enough water, if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not moving enough, if you're not eating enough good food. So all of those things really need to be optimized so that you can feel better, you can feel stronger, because removing the toxins in step four is stressful. And so you want to be more resilient, as you were talking about. And then there's a lot of people, when we're talking about the different stages or the different, what did I call them? The different levels of fatigue, like there's going to be a lot of people who feel really good after step two, replacing those deficiencies.
Yeah.
But the job isn't over, because if you want to take supplements to replace step two for the rest of your life, then you can stop there. But like I said, you gotta fix the toxicities, which are causing 90% of those deficiencies.
Got it.
So then step three, we're opening up the detoxification pathways. So in order to get stuff out of the body, you got to pee it out, poop it out, breathe it out, sweat it out. And so there's herbs and there's different things that we use in order to open up these pathways, because by definition, if you have long haulers, if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, those toxins in step four are clogging those detoxification pathways. So you have to open those up first. And this is when this process is so important, and one that I see missed so often, because and that ends up causing people to feel worse when they're going through this process. If you're going to reach into step four and grab some sort of toxicity, let's say it's the virus, or let's say maybe it's mold, you pull it into the detoxification pathways, the blood, the lymph, the liver, the kidney. If those pathways are clogged, guess what's going to happen? That mold is going to go in a different compartment, right back to where it came from. It's not going outside the body. And consequently, you're basically being re-exposed to it, and you're going to feel worse. And so that's why we have to open up those pathways in step three.
Yeah, and keep going.
I was just going to say, and then we go into step four, and we go after those heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, the allergies, the negative emotional patterns, which we can talk about more in a minute, and the electromagnetic fields.
Love it. That fortifying the body, oftentimes, like I said at the beginning, was people tend to go after the molds and the metals and all of that at the very beginning without getting the emunctories open, the pathways in step three, without then having the energy to actually deal with it. So I like that stepwise process in general. And I know it's very up to the individual and what their level of toxicity or body burden is, but what's that process look like? What have you found with working with these folks around the globe?
Like, you mean in terms of how long does it take?
Yeah.
So it's 6 to 12 months generally, depending on the number of causes that somebody has, the length of time that they've had it, and the severity of each of those causes.
Sure.
So for somebody who has long haulers, it's going to be more along the lines of 6 months, depending on all those different factors.
Got it. Yeah, because that I know it's very individualized. People always ask, well, how long is that going to take, Doc? And just to give a ballpark so that people have realistic expectations, because sometimes, folks get frustrated. They want to be the overachiever. And this is not something that you can rush.
Right.
It is on that discovery of finding the root cause. I love that. We always ask as prep questions, what's the one thing that people can really put into action or think about from the podcast? And I love that you put get to the root cause, right? It's not about the supplements. It's not about the different the roots. It's really understanding what is the body burden and what are we dealing with, because that's how you individualize the program for folks to help them the best. That can be frustrating to people, but it is really, it's good medicine. It's like, it's essential. Instead of selling, the pills and the bottles and all of the supplements, it's really around, we have a game plan, we have a route, we have an understanding, and we know what's on the playing field here. So I love that.
And what we tell people too is that, at 6 months, you may not have resolved all your causes, but you know which ones they are, and you have a plan for each one of them. So, if it takes molds, like molds, heavy metals, chemicals, and infections can on their own take 6 to 12 to 18 months, like depending on how fast you can move through the process, how clogged your detoxification pathways are, how sensitive you are to supplements, so it can take a while. But when you think about it, what's 1, 2, even 3 years out of your life when you've been sick for 20, or when you're going to be alive for 80? Like I went through residency and it was 3 years and it was really hard, but it was only 3 years, and I've got the rest of my life to use my MD and all that sort of stuff, so it's kind of like it's like doing a master's degree in your health when you kind of go through a process like this. But yeah, you absolutely have to have eyes wide open. You have to understand that everybody's an individual, and that if it takes you longer, it's okay. There's no race, it's all about, and the goal is that you keep on improving and keep on feeling better, but yes, we want you to get 100% better. But, if your energy is an 8 out of 10, 6 months in, when you started off with a 3 out of 10, where 10 is ideal energy, you're going to take that, right? You're going to be happy because you can now work a job. You can go for hikes on the weekend, whatever it is that you can do, yes, it'll be nice for you to be 100%. But you have to also, and that's one of the things we teach, is that you have to have gratitude for wherever you are and have a vision for where you want to go.
Yeah. So let's you open that up. Let's talk about the belief system, because that was in the fourth phase of this, right? On levels of toxicity, and you said negative beliefs. And so what do you see? Is there a kind of a constellation of beliefs that sometimes people with long haulers get stuck in, or is there some patterns to be aware of?
Yeah, so when we're talking about negative beliefs or negative emotional patterns, we're talking about the ACEs. So we're talking about things. ACE stands for adverse childhood event, but it can be adverse life event. It can be anything that has happened to you in your life that has changed the way that you see the world. Albert Einstein said one of the most, and I'm going to butcher it, but one of the most important decisions that you can make in your lifetime is determining whether or not the world is a safe or unsafe place. If you believe that the world is a safe place, there is a lot less stress on the body, on your mind, body, spirit, emotions, right? But with a lot of these adaptations that we make throughout our lives based off of the abuse that we have growing up, whether it's really significant, like physical, mental, emotional, sexual, or whether it is less significant or more mild, like maybe rejection by a peer group, which is something that I had, where I was like, I never had any sort of significant abuse. But when I go back and I look at it, I was rejected by a peer group a couple of different times. And that significantly changed the way that I saw friendship. It made me more guarded. It made me think that the world wasn't as safe of a place. Like the teasing that happens in elementary school and middle school, like these are really hard times for humans. And consequently, it changes your relationship to how you see the world. And consequently, we know that 80% of our thoughts are negative on a daily basis, right? And so what we have to do is we have to retrain our brain. We have to look at the neuroplasticity, or the way that the brain changes, and change it by thinking good thoughts and putting good thoughts into our brains. And so some of this we have NARM practitioners in our program, which stands for Neuroaffective Relational Model for Trauma, but you don't have to have trauma in order to have benefit from that. And then we also have a daily mindset practice that we teach people, which is all about gratitudes. 3 gratitudes a day is what the research recommends to significantly change the way that you see the world, because then you start to look every single day for things to be grateful for. And then it's looking at, and then it's creating a vision for your life. The body doesn't know the difference, or the brain doesn't know the difference between reality and imagination. I feel like I'm talking about the Matrix since it just came out. Reality or imagination. And so consequently, there have been studies that have been done of people who like with piano players, they're not actually practicing on the piano, they're just thinking about practicing in their minds, and they were just as good as people who had practiced, except for the muscle memory. So, and so if you believe, and then it's living into what that feeling is that that you have for the future and what you want your life to look like. And then it's looking at any sort of beliefs that are limiting you and flipping them on their heads into empowering beliefs. And then it's looking at questions that you're asking yourself that might not be serving you and flipping them into empowering questions. Like, instead of why is this happening to me, ask yourself, what can I do today to love myself even more? That's a real favorite of mine. Or what can I do today to move my health forward even more? So it's combining these, we talk so much about putting organic food in our mouths, but we're not talking enough about putting organic thoughts in our brains, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big part of the program and what we do. And the people who go through the program, it's more than just about the physical medicine that we're shifting, and the people who really buy into the mindset piece, as well as the mindfulness, different practices that we have, do better.
I love that. I think the power, we don't really realize and really don't understand the potential of how powerful we really are in what we're seeing, and how outside of us impacts the internal environment, right? I've had speakers on trauma, on people viewing the same event have completely different internal processes. And well, why is that? And because of belief systems and or the resiliency of the individual, or how much they've handled or have looked at traumatic events, or events that had a trauma impact on them, whether it be the ACE scores. When you look at that, it's like, well, being born onto the planet, really nobody gets out of here alive. So there are those pieces of like, shit happens, and we all have our own kind of individualized curriculum of what we came to learn or be exposed to or handle. And people really, have gone through some real heinous events and have turned those into some of their best attributes of what they learned from it and sharing with others. And I think now more than ever, that aspect of having the vision, rather than having the vision kind of put into us, right? I mean, it's a really crappy vision what's going on right now. And the way that people talk about, what the future looks like. I kind of think about Sinclair's book Lifespan, and he looked at like the affluent countries, in particular the US, with the amount of depression, of really not a great vision for what the future holds. And then what the study showed in kind of third world countries, of just the optimism and the happiness, and their vision for the future was so positive that he just said, is this just a disease process of affluence, of, wow, you have such abundance and ability for things, but you're missing the heart of it. And really, one component of this platform, what I really want to bring forth in this year, is really help with pulling out of like practitioners and providers such as yourself, of like, well, what is the vision? Like, what do you hold out for people coming through your program? And what have you seen, like the outcomes of, kind of not the rags to riches, but from like fatigue, debilitated, to like full on heart creation, right? Like that is the piece that I want to gain clarity. I want to share with my listeners and viewers. Maybe you want to speak into that, just because I've kind of got on a roll there.
Oh, I loved it. You're speaking my language.
Yeah.
So what we take people through is basically what's your perfect 10 day, and so you wake up in the morning, who you next to, What does the bed feel like? What's the weather outside? What does your house look like? You move through your morning. What does that look like? Where are you living? Who do you interact with? What are you listening to? Are you listening to music? What is it? And then when you go to work, what does that look like? How does that feel? And all of it is based on how we feel. That's a lot of what the law of attraction talks about as well. Is this resonance with, you're more likely to be successful when you jive with what feels good. So getting in your mind what feels good and balancing out, what does your day look like from a work perspective? What does it look like from a personal perspective? For me, I love to sing. And so I incorporate singing, and I take voice lessons and all this sort of stuff because I'm singing those musicals. And so I incorporate that, and I've got my guitar right here next to me to make sure that I'm doing that every single day. When I take a break, I'm going to go ahead and do that so that I am balancing all of these things that really juice me up, that get me excited. I love sports. And so I'm either playing sports or I'm watching sports, or sports commentary is really fun for me. Spending time with my family, what's fun for us? Are we watching movies? So kind of planning out, what does your perfect day look like? Because guess what? If you don't have a map, if you don't have a plan, you're never going to get there. Yeah. So you have to have that vision for your life in order to achieve it.
I love it. It brings up the question that I've really been asking folks is what brings you joy? And it's eye-opening to see people get stopped. They don't know. As if like, well, Dr. Greg, don't you realize there's a pandemic happening? Like, I'm not allowed to have joy. Right. It's like, no, we need to have joy. Like this year in particular, we're bringing it. And I love you going through that picture of the day, and that's built into your program and system for folks. That is a crucial component, right? It's not just on the food, on the supplements, etc. It is, the power of the mind component. It's not just all in your head either. I mean, those other aspects of the biochemistry are so important as well.
Well, and I'll just say too that, it took me sitting with my therapist 10, 15 years ago, where she said, how you doing? I said, I'm depressed. And we kind of got into it. And she said, well, what did you used to do for fun? I was like, well, when I was young, I would play sports and music. Yeah. She said, well, why don't you do those things? And I did, and it made a huge difference.
I love that. Great suggestion. So what about, how do you know if you can help somebody or not help them with their long haulers?
So it really depends on the number of causes that they've addressed. If they've addressed all of the causes and they haven't had success, there's a cause out there that I don't know about. Because in reality, we know this much about the human body in medicine in a stadium of 100,000 people, that big old Texas AT&T stadium or whatever. Yeah. And so there's other causes out there, with my 33 different causes. I just know that I'm getting a ton of them, and hopefully I'm getting, 90% of them. So for me, because it's all about matching up the causes that you have with the right treatment. And so if you've got tried and true treatments and you know what causes an individual has, and you match them up, and then you adjust for the nuances of the individual, that's essentially a recipe for success. And so if somebody has already gone through that with everything that we have to offer, then we say, unfortunately, we can't help you. But for those who haven't, then we know that we can help them.
Got it. So yeah, uncovering that in totality of symptoms. So I love that because that is important, where you're not promising the moon, but you've got a good tried true system that works. So can you share some stories of folks that have gone through the program and what you've seen? Because my guess is you've got some pretty compelling stories.
Absolutely. So, first thing is people can go to fixyourfatigue.com/results, and they can see about 40 different stories on there of people who've been in different situations who've had success with our program. But I think, let's start off with, let's change her name. We'll say Josie. So Josie came to us, and she was an athlete. So she was a runner. She all of a sudden, she started to get fatigue, and she started to get these other weird symptoms as well. So she had pain on the bottom of her feet. She had muscle cramps that were happening mostly in her calves at night. She was having depression, and she was having sleep problems. And so one of the things that we determined was that she had a number of these causes. So she had, everybody who we see has adrenal gland dysfunction and mitochondrial dysfunction. And so we started replacing those. She also, oh, and I forgot, she also had hyperthyroidism. So she had Graves' disease. She was just diagnosed with it. And we figured out that that was actually from H. pylori, and we treated the H. pylori and the Graves went away. But the reality is that when you have Graves or hyperthyroidism, you also have hypothyroidism. They're both happening at the same time. And so then we also had to address the hypothyroidism, which we did. And that was caused by an infection called Bartonella, which was also causing the pain on the bottom of the feet, usually misdiagnosed as plantar fasciitis. It was causing the muscle cramps in the calves, the sleep problems. And so we fixed that, and that took care of a number of the other symptoms. And then she also had mold in her home. And so she needed to do a little bit of work there. And that all of that made a significant difference in her life. So there were a couple of other causes, but that was probably one of the main things. And she went from like a 3 out of 10 energy to an 8 or 9 out of 10 energy, so that she can now exercise as much as she wants. She works as a nurse, and she was able to pick up more shifts and go on and get her nurse practitioner. So there's a number of different things, that, we always forget. It's not just about the fatigue, right? Or the long haulers. It's about what it's taking away from you, or what you can achieve if you actually didn't have this thing. Because, we really only, as far as I know, we only get this one life. I believe in other things, but only get this one life in this form, right? And so we want to make the most out of it, and we really can't make the most out of it if we don't have the energy that we need to. Energy is like the currency of life, right? If you can't get out of bed, you can't do anything, right? So that's why it's so important for people to have this awareness and to get this fixed so that they can live their best life. But that's Josie, or whatever I called her.
Love it. Yeah, that was Josie. The runner, the athlete, nurse practitioner. It is, it's helpful for folks to hear, maybe even picture themselves. If you are listening to this show, and this is resonating with you, please, I want you to think about 3 other people out there that may benefit from this message, because it comes from word of mouth. It's not coming from the top down, folks. That long enough. If you've been listening to anything on the show over the last couple of years, it just isn't coming from above. It's not coming from the government. It's not coming from public health. It's coming from real people helping each other. And, it's that groundswell that I really want to be a part of. That's what this platform is about. So, think of those people and don't delay. Just share the show with them and say, and let them know why you shared it, what you were thinking about them. Because I think sometimes we get a little shy about I'm not sure if they'll like it, or I might upset them. They're going to love that you were thinking of them and you reached out and you shared some information, and they can do whatever they want with it. But definitely let's get the word out this year, because it is time. That's what we're up to. And I'm bringing on experts to share with you all, because they have an amazing message to help, and big purposes. And that's really what lights me up, is to bring people together and get the word out, because that's what we're doing this year. So what else do you have? Some practical components for folks that have made it this far in the show, that they get the bonus for listening to the end here with Dr. Evan. What would you recommend on somebody with long haulers, of just maybe some simple things that they could put in? And I think that could be the level 1 component that you shared, of starting with that.
Yeah, the lifestyle habits are huge. I would say, the mindset stuff and the lifestyle habits. and then addressing the live active virus. But lifestyle habits are, you got to drink more water, you got to eat better food, you got to get more movement, or actually in this case, if you're not feeling well, you don't want to get more movement. You want to figure out what your Goldilocks dose of movement is, where if you feel worse, don't do that, because you're just basically going to stress out the human organism and you're going to cause more deficiencies. So and then you want to make sure that you're getting more sleep. So oftentimes what this is a message telling us to stop pressing, stop pressuring yourself, stop trying so hard, right? Get into a place of fun and get into a place of ease, right? This was kind of one of the messages that I had. I had chronic fatigue for 5 years, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was pressuring so much, trying so hard. And so that's one of these messages, and it's unfortunately it's epidemic in our society, where people are pressing, and they feel a lot of pressure in their lives. And so it's doing those lifestyle habits, and then doing the mindset work. If you're just doing gratitudes every day, that is going to radically change your life.
I love that. I actually have that as part of, for my staff and for the culture that we're creating here at Nature Cures. We have a gratitude board, and every day, every week, we go in and we're putting gratitude on the board, sharing as a community. And then we loved it so much in the back office, we pulled it out front into the reception area for our patients to participate. Nice. Because that gratitude process, it's like basically putting on a new lens. Like, we're not trained in that. So you've got to, it's like flexing a new muscle. Yeah, you might kind of fall off the horse a few times, but just keep at it. It's like you've got to put on, tune the brain towards the frequencies that you're wanting to see in the world. This year, really, I put forth, I kind of percolated over in December into the darkness of I want to see more love in the world. So I chose for a word for the year, love. And that comes out as joy. It comes out as bliss. It's going to be, helping me make decisions on what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Like, is this thing lighting me up? Is it filling my cup so that my cup can runneth over, so I can share with all of you, like, hey, this is what, you don't have to do it this way, but it seems to be working pretty well for me. So let's, more love. Like, we can all be love beamers. But that means you got to get your energy back. If you got long haulers, there's a whole system here that you can try out. And we want to plug you into the resources and support, because, you can do it yourself. You can do it on your own, but, I don't know, if I try to fix the hole on my roof or my car, it's going to end horribly, right? It's just not my skill set. It's not what I do. Right. And so getting the support, getting the experts, it really gets you into a jump start, and gets you going. Any last parting words of wisdom, Doc?
Yeah, I would just dovetail on that and say, it's just about compressing time. Mm-hmm. You go with an expert so that you can compress that time, and you can get better faster so that you can do other things in your life. And that's what I would encourage people to do, is to keep getting answers, keep looking, keep searching for answers if you haven't been able to figure out what your health issues are, and stay with an optimistic attitude, express those gratitudes for where you are, realizes that there's lessons in what's happening to you, but then also have a better vision for your future so that you can be successful.
Love it. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. I wouldn't be doing it without you. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review. That does make a difference. And let people know what you got out of the show. Give them a little tidbit, get them on here, get them on the platform, and let's do this together. Because that's how we're, in the unified field of what I'm a big proponent of. We're just pretending to be separate right now, you and I. So let's just do it together. You are another me. There are ancient symbols out there that definitely signify it. Our ancestors have shared that information with us. So let's go together. That's what we're doing. So much love to everybody out there. Dr. Evan, thank you for coming on. Namaste, and keep up the light beaming. Everybody, such a pleasure. What the Health on Contact Talk Radio. We are here on Tuesdays from 2 to 3 Pacific time. Get out there and share the word. See you next week.